He stepped through the glass doors just as the morning rain began to fade. His boots left faint, wet prints on a marble floor. Quiet evidence of a man who worked, not one who watched others work. His clothes were simple. A faded button-down, sleeves rolled neatly, an old pair of work boots that had seen more honest days than most of the suits in the room. He carried no laptop bag, no gold watch, no sleek tie. Just a plain brown folder, held close to his chest. At the reception desk sat Karen. Sharp bob haircut, glossy nails tapping impatiently against her phone screen. She barely looked up before giving him the kind of smile people use when they think they're being polite, but really aren't. "Maintenance applications are through the side door," she said, her tone smooth but dismissive. The man's lips curved into a patient smile. "Actually," he replied, "I have a meeting at 9. That made her pause. Not long, just enough to look him over again. A slow scan. The boots, the shirt, the lack of a tie. Then, with a half smirk, she asked, "A meeting? With who?" He opened the folder, showing a neatly printed schedule. Mr. Taylor. Karen laughed lightly, as though he'd made a joke. "Mr. Taylor? That's our CO." He nodded, unbothered. "Yes, I know." Now she leaned back in her chair, eyebrows raised, her voice dripping with amusement. "And what would he want with you?" The man didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. He simply looked around the lobby, past her, past the busy employees pretending not to stare, to the large silver plaque on the wall that read, "Harper Dynamics, a legacy of excellence." He studied it quietly, his reflection faintly visible in the polished metal. A legacy he knew better than anyone, because he'd built it, from a single truck, a borrowed loan, and a dream nobody believed in. But today, standing in front of his own company, he realized something had changed. Not the building, not the logo, the people. And that's why he was here, to remind them where that legacy of excellence had really come from, and what it looked like when it walked in wearing work boots. David Harper, a name that once echoed in business magazines, keynote speeches, and success stories about self-made millionaires. He had built Harper Dynamics from nothing. One truck, a rented warehouse, and a promise to his late father, "I'll build something that lasts." 20 years later, it had. The company had expanded into a multi-million-dollar logistics empire, managing transport for hospitals, tech firms, and even the city itself. David's leadership had been the foundation. Fair, humble, people first. But lately, something had shifted. He'd begun to hear rumors. Quiet ones at first, whispered between long-time employees who still remembered his early days. That the company wasn't the same anymore. That since he'd stepped back to focus on expansion and partnerships, the warmth was gone. The managers acted entitled. Supervisors looked down on warehouse staff. Receptionists, like Karen, treated workers based on their shoes, not their souls. David didn't want to believe it, but the truth gnawed at him. He remembered sweeping floors in his first rented office when the janitor called in sick. He remembered shaking every driver's hand before they hit the road. He remembered telling new hires, "Respect doesn't wear a suit." Now, he wasn't so sure those words still meant anything inside his walls. So, one cold Monday morning, he decided to find out. He put away his tailored suits, his gold cufflinks, and his sleek company car. Instead, he wore old jeans, a button-down shirt, and work boots that had walked through mud and hard labor before. He printed out a resume under the name David H. Johnson. Occupation, custodian. Experience, maintenance, repairs, cleaning services. He left off every title, every award, every sign of power. When he walked through the doors of Harper Dynamics' regional office that morning, he wasn't the CEO anymore. He was just another man looking for a job, a man no one would bother pretending to impress. He wanted to see how people really behaved when they thought no one important was watching, how they treated those who couldn't give them anything in return. As he took a seat in the waiting area, clipboard in hand, he could already feel it, the difference in how people looked at him. Some barely glanced his way. One young intern wrinkled his nose and whispered to a co-worker, and behind the reception desk, Karen, with her manicured nails and carefully practiced smile, looked like the kind of person who didn't just notice what you wore. She'd judge you by it. David took a slow breath, his expression calm. This was exactly what he'd come to see. He wasn't here to play the boss today. He was here to learn who in his company had forgotten what respect looked like. Karen tapped her manicured nails against the glass counter. Click, 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 the rhythm of impatience. Her expression said it all. She'd already decided who David was before he even opened his mouth. Look, she sighed, her tone dripping with superiority. We don't usually take walk-ins. You'll need to fill this out. She slid the clipboard across the counter with 2 fingers, like she didn't want to touch it for too long. Then, as David took a pen, she leaned toward her co-worker, a younger woman scrolling through her phone, and whispered not quietly enough. Can you believe this? Shows up looking like that. Says he's got a meeting with the CEO for a janitor job. Her co-worker snickered, biting her lip to hide the smile. Maybe he thinks CEO stands for cleaning every office. They both laughed. David didn't flinch. He simply gave a polite nod and focused on the clipboard. His handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind of penmanship that spoke of someone who took pride in every detail, no matter how small. Name, David H. Johnson. Position applied for custodian. David stopped in front of her and glanced down at the clipboard, the janitor's application form she'd carelessly shoved across the counter. He picked it up with both hands, smoothed out the creases, and laid it neatly back on the desk. His voice was calm, measured, but each word carried weight. This, he said quietly, is how you treat people who walk in looking for honest work? No one dared to move. He looked around the lobby, at the interns, the HR assistant, the security guard by the door. When do we start deciding who deserves respect based on their shoes? Their shirt? Their title? Karen opened her mouth, her voice trembling. Sir, I didn't mean... David met her eyes, his tone steady. You did. You meant every word. That's the problem. The words hung in the air like a mirror, one that reflected everything wrong with how far the company had drifted from its roots. He didn't scold her further. Instead, he looked at the company logo again, Harper Dynamics, a legacy of excellence, and shook his head slightly. Excellence isn't just about innovation, he said softly. It's about integrity. My father used to clean factory floors at night, so I could go to school during the day. If someone had spoken to him the way you just spoke to me, he paused, his jaw tightening for just a second, there wouldn't be a Harper Dynamics. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. Everyone in that lobby felt smaller, humbled. Then, turning to the young HR assistant, he said, Please schedule a company-wide meeting for this afternoon. Cancel everything else. She nodded instantly, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Mr. Harper. He continued, We're not just going to rebuild our strategy. We're rebuilding our character. Because if we lose that, we lose everything. With that, he turned and walked toward the elevator, his calm presence leaving a wake of stunned reflection behind him. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime. No one spoke for a long time. Karen stared at the clipboard in front of her, the one she'd treated like garbage an hour ago, and realized that the man she had mocked, the janitor applicant, had built every inch of the company she worked for. Her reflection in the polished counter looked unfamiliar. The pearls, the perfect hair, the smug confidence, they all suddenly felt hollow. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the one in control. She felt like the one who had everything to learn. 2 weeks later, the energy inside Harper Dynamics felt different. Quieter, more thoughtful. The echo of that day in the lobby hadn't faded. If anything, it had started something far greater. David's words had rippled through the company like a current of conscience. The board of directors, the regional heads, even the janitorial staff. Everyone had heard about the CO who applied for his own job. It became the story whispered in hallways, the lesson passed around like gospel. Then came the announcement. An email went out to every employee, subject line. The Dignity Project, a new beginning. The initiative, personally introduced by David Harper himself, wasn't just another corporate policy. It was a movement. Every department, from executive offices to delivery teams, would take part in empathy and respect workshops. Every manager would spend 1 day a month shadowing frontline workers, Janitors, drivers, receptionists, cleaners, the people who made the company function quietly in the background. At the launch meeting, David stood on stage in front of hundreds of employees, wearing the same simple blue shirt from that morning in the lobby. He didn't read from a script. He just spoke from the heart. Titles fade. Power changes hands. But how we treat people, that's what defines us. He paused, scanning the crowd. We'll never build something great if we look down on the hands that keep it standing. The applause was long and sincere, not the forced kind corporate meetings often hear, but the kind that carries gratitude. And Karen? She was there too, sitting in the front row. Gone was the cold confidence, the polished perfection. She wore a plain gray cardigan, her name badge slightly crooked, and a look of quiet humility. When she saw David afterward, she walked up to him slowly. "Mr. Harper," she said softly, "I've been taking the training. I wanted to thank you for giving me a second chance." He smiled, not out of pride, but relief. Everyone deserves one. That's how change starts. She nodded, eyes glistening, and for the first time, she meant every word she said. Later that evening, David drove to the edge of town, to the old warehouse where Harper Dynamics had been born. The parking lot was cracked, the walls faded. But inside, the spirit of the company's early days still lingered. The smell of oil, the hum of machines, the energy of honest work. He walked into his small office, untouched since the beginning. On the wall, above a worn wooden desk, hung a single-frame quote written in his mother's handwriting. "Respect isn't earned by title. It's shown by how you treat those without one." David sat down, looked out the window at the old delivery trucks, still bearing his company's name, and smiled. Harper Dynamics had grown into an empire, but in that quiet moment, surrounded by the ghosts of humble beginnings, he knew that its true strength didn't come from innovation or profits or prestige. It came from decency. And this time, he was making sure no one in the company, from the boardroom to the broom closet, ever forgot that again. They laughed when he walked in, at the dust on his boots, the wrinkles on his shirt, the quiet way he spoke. To them, he was just another man beneath them, a name they didn't bother to ask, a story they didn't care to know. But when the truth surfaced, when they realized the man they mocked was the one who built everything around them, silence replaced the laughter. The same floor they stood on, the company name shining above their heads, the paychecks they cashed every Friday, all existed because of the man they dismissed as unimportant. They learned that day what power really looks like. It doesn't need designer suits or polished shoes. It doesn't shout, boast, or demand attention. True greatness moves quietly, confident, humble, and unshaken. Sometimes it walks in wearing work boots, carrying not ego, but experience. And when it finally speaks, the whole room listens, not out of fear, but out of respect. Because the greatest leaders don't stand above others. They remind the world who built the ground everyone else stands on. Experience. 20 years in operation, facilities, and leadership. References. Available upon request. When he handed it back, Karen barely glanced at it before rolling her eyes. "Sweetheart," she said, tilting her head in mock sympathy, "you don't need to write all that experience. It's just cleaning floors." David smiled softly. "Every job deserves the same effort," he replied, voice calm, steady, like stone beneath water. That threw her for a second. She wasn't used to calm confidence from someone she thought was beneath her. Her smirk faltered, then returned twice as sharp. "Well," she said, turning the paper over and pretending to read, "I'll send it somewhere, but don't hold your breath." Behind her, 2 interns overheard and chuckled under their breath. One even muttered, "Guess HR's taking charity cases now." David said nothing. He simply looked around the lobby, the same one he designed years ago. The marble floor, the gold-trimmed logo, Harper Dynamics, built with integrity. The irony burned. Moments later, a young HR assistant, barely out of college, hurried past the front desk, clutching a folder. She stopped mid-step. "Hey, has Mr. Harper's 9 o'clock arrived yet?" Karen grinned, without missing a beat. "Nope," she said smugly. "But I do have a janitor applicant pretending he's meeting with the CEO. Maybe that's who you meant." The assistant blinked. "Wait!" She looked at David, confusion creeping in. "You mean that Mr. Harper?" Karen laughed, full and loud this time. "Honey, the CEO doesn't look like that. Trust me, if he walked in, you'd know." But the assistant didn't laugh. She looked pale. "Karen," she whispered, pointing past her shoulder. Karen turned. The elevator doors slid open. Out stepped Michael Taylor, the regional director, followed by two senior executives. Their faces were serious, their posture straight, and when they spotted David standing quietly at the counter, every one of them stopped. Karen blinked in confusion as Michael's face broke into a mix of shock and panic. "Sir," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Harper?" The entire lobby went still. The interns froze mid-laugh. The HR assistant looked like she might drop her papers. Karen's smile slowly crumbled, her confidence draining from her face as the realization sank in. The janitor applicant she'd mocked wasn't looking for a job. He owned the company. The air in the lobby shifted. It was subtle at first, a stillness like the seconds before a storm. The hum of chatter faded. Even the receptionist's keyboard click stopped. The elevator chimed softly. Out stepped three executives in crisp suits, their laughter stiff and nervous, the kind that only existed in the presence of someone powerful. They adjusted their ties, smoothed their jackets, and stood taller than before. And then the final man stepped out. He wasn't the tallest in the group, but somehow he owned the room. His posture was calm, his expression unreadable. A man used to making decisions that moved millions. He wore a simple gray suit, no flashy watch, no air of arrogance, just quiet control. Karen's eyes lit up instantly. She leaned forward, eager, her entire demeanor transforming in seconds. "Mr. Taylor." "Good morning, sir," she said brightly, voice suddenly syrup-sweet. But Mr. Taylor didn't even glance her way. His eyes locked onto David, the man she dismissed not 15 minutes earlier. And then, to everyone's shock, a genuine smile spread across Taylor's face. "Good to see you again, Mr. Harper," he said warmly. The sound of that name hit the lobby like thunder. Karen's jaw went slack. "And Mr. Harper?" she stammered, her voice a dry whisper. David simply nodded. "That's right. But please," he said, his tone humble but deliberate, "I prefer David." The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that humbles people. The young HR assistant gasped and nearly dropped her tablet. The interns froze behind their desks. Even the janitor mopping near the corner stopped mid-swipe, his eyes wide. Karen's hand shook as she fumbled with her pen, her confident posture collapsing into panic. "Sir, I didn't realize." David raised a hand gently. His expression didn't hold anger, just disappointment. "You didn't have to," he said softly. "You were just being yourself." The weight of those words sank deep. You could feel it. Then he turned to Mr. Taylor. "I wanted to see how my people were treated, when no one thought a title was watching. It seems I found my answer." He glanced slowly around the lobby, at the glossy walls, the Harper Dynamics emblem engraved in steel behind the desk, and the employees pretending not to listen. "This company," he said quietly, "was built on respect, on dignity, on the belief that no job and no person is beneath another." Karen's eyes shimmered, her earlier smugness replaced with guilt and fear. "Mr. Harper, please, I didn't mean." He met her eyes, not cruelly, not angrily, but with something that stung worse than either: truth. "Intent doesn't erase impact," he said calmly. "You represent this company the moment someone walks through that door. And today, you showed me something I needed to see." He turned to Taylor again, his tone firm now. "Let's meet in the conference room. We have a culture to fix." Taylor nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." As they walked away, Karen stood frozen, her cheeks flushed red, her perfect posture wilted. The young HR assistant finally broke the silence with a whisper to her co-worker. "He came here as a janitor?" The co-worker nodded faintly. "No, he came here as a test." David didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The power in the room had shifted completely, and everyone felt it. He stepped slowly toward the front desk, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the marble-floored lobby. The same path he had walked in silence only an hour earlier as a janitor. Karen watched him approach, her hands trembling slightly on the keyboard she no longer dared to touch.